Hi everyone, welcome to the Movieception Show. My name is Fariba, and today I want to take a little bit of my time to give my review on this new movie called Michael. I'm kidding. Yes, but the new Michael Jackson biopic is now out in theaters, and I want to just kind of share my experience watching the film. People are watching in theaters, people are taking their families, their friends, etc. And if you haven't heard, the movie's making a lot of money, breaking a lot of records. So yeah, let's go right into it. So I actually did not watch the movie like the last few days or something, but I actually saw it as early as Wednesday of this week. If you're not aware, there was actually an early access that was happening across the nation. I don't know if there's something that was happening outside the United States, but here in the United States, they actually had an early access on Wednesday. And so that was honestly the first showing of the new Michael Jackson movie. And I thought, if I'm going to go and watch this movie, I'm going to go take my dad, because my dad actually grew up listening to Michael Jackson. I mean, he was born in the 60s, so he grew up watching and listening to Michael Jackson. One of the things that I actually have a really fond memory of is the fact that we were kind of like going through our garage and whatnot, and one of the things that he actually showed me was some of his vinyl records. So he actually kept a lot of them after so many years, and one of them happened to be Thriller, which honestly stunned me, because I was like, you still have the Michael Jackson Thriller album with you? And I was really stunned. I think it's somewhere still in our garage. You probably have to pull it out. I know we were talking about it, but yeah, so he was definitely a huge Michael Jackson fan. I actually was talking to him about it as, we were waiting for the movie to come out. And now, of course, with my dad, he doesn't go to the movies that often anymore, just because he does have a little bit of a physical issue. So he usually likes to watch the movies at home, wants to end up on streaming. But he was able to come and watch the new Michael Jackson movie with me, because it is Michael Jackson, right? I mean, he grew up listening to them. And after speaking with him, he's like, you know what, I'll come. So we went to go see Michael this past Wednesday, and I'll tell you right now, the theater was absolutely packed. There was like friends, families. I mean, the lady next to me was watching the movie with her good friend, and they were just talking about some of the concerts they may have gone to see Michael Jackson. So everyone's really in the vibe, let alone the fact that there was like a stereo that was playing, and it was like playing all the Michael Jackson hits. So we were definitely in the mood for Michael Jackson, and so that really helped with the experience. Now, before the movie itself started, I know I will admit that I was a little concerned, because the first reviews that came out, I believe like a day or two before, and they were not all that positive. You probably seen Rotten Tomatoes, but I think right now, at that time it was like a low 30s, mid 30s score, like around 33, 35. And so I was a little concerned, I will admit to that. And I think one of the things I was hearing a lot about is the fact that it has the style, but it lacks the substance, and I was very curious what they meant by the substance. But because of that, I was a little concerned going into the movie. But even that being the case, I was still going to be open about it, just because, I also, grew up listening to a lot of Michael Jackson. Now, of course, I'm not that demographic that was able to live through a whole, lot of Michael Jackson and watched him, peak high through his career, because I wasn't really born by that point. I believe I'm actually the same age as his kids. So yeah, I'm like on the young side. I don't even think I was 13 when he had passed away back in 2009. But I think right after that, I started to really get into his music, and I was listening to a lot of his bangers, like Beat It, Billie Jean, Thriller, Smooth Criminal, Human Nature, Dirty Diana, so on and so forth. There's also Rock My World, all that sort of stuff. And so I actually was like, very tuned into his music, so I was very familiar with it. I kind of learned a lot of the moves from his music videos, so I was like really kind of into the whole thing. So yeah, there was that whole experience of it. So let's get down into the actual movie itself. And so I'll say this, overall, I enjoyed it. I had a really good time watching the movie. I actually thought it was a very, it was a good movie. I don't think it was the greatest movie. I don't think it's gonna be like Oscar worthy, but it's a good movie. And one of the reasons why this movie works is because it is a celebration of Michael Jackson's life, at least especially during the height of his career. And that's very clear with how they executed the whole storyline. Now, the story itself, yes, it's about Michael Jackson, but it covers his life from the early onset of Jackson 5 up until 1988, so we don't go to the 90s yet. I think the second part will cover more of his more recent life, but the first half is really focused on Michael really up on his rise, so it's like the rise of Michael Jackson. But even that being the case, the the real focus of the story is the fact that he is, yes, he's Michael Jackson, but he's also dealing with this conflict with his own father, so being controlled by him. Even once he was starting to bring out his own solo career, he was still stuck under the control of his dad. So this is purely what this main story is about, is him trying to get away from his father, trying to find his courage to finally step away from his control and finally have his own destiny, right? And that becomes the main focus of this movie, and you can see that a lot. Like, I mean, this is, I would say, probably in this film, the 3, maybe 4 main characters that we see as like maybe a good chunk of this movie is, of course, Michael Jackson, his father Joe Jackson, his mother Catherine Jackson, and I would probably say the 4th most watched character was probably his his bodyguard. So yeah, but this is clearly what the main focus is. It's about him and his father, and that's what this movie purely focuses on. And so that's what the story is gonna be mostly, showcase. And so based on that, I will say this: I think some of the more positive aspects of this movie is the fact that the performance, at least the main performance that we see, are absolutely top notch. I mean, first off, Jafar Jackson, I mean, absolutely stunning. He does a really great job of embodying his uncle, because now, if you guys don't know, Jafar Jackson is actually the son of his brother, I believe, Jermaine, and this is actually, I think, his first acting role, like his first leading acting role at least. And so he did a really great job. I mean, he really embodied just who Michael Jackson is, the physicality, his mannerism. I mean, even got down to like the details, like his voice. Like, I remember in the theater, once he started talking, everyone in my theater was like, "Holy cow!" Like, because it was quite accurate, because Michael Jackson's voice is quite distinct, and so it's not really easy to do that. But he does a really great job of getting the correct mannerism, his body language, and let alone let's talk about the performances, like the musical aspects. I mean, he does a great job. I mean, when you saw some of him, some of the moments where he is trying to replicate some of the key musical moves, whether it be Thriller or Beat It or even the moonwalk, right? He got them. It was pristine. The accuracy was there. I don't know how he was managed to do that. I believe he may have done a lot of training or had to do a lot of rehearsals, but he really nailed them. And I think because of that, this movie worked because of Jafar Jackson, because otherwise it wouldn't have. There would have been a huge disconnect. So props to Jafar Jackson. He does a really great job of embodying his uncle, giving us kind of the essence of Michael, especially now that it's been like, what, 17 years since he had passed away, and just to kind of see an image of him on the big screen, recreating all these big hits, like, it does bring a lot of nostalgia. So there's that. Coleman Domingo as Joe Jackson, I'm not gonna say it, but I gotta say, like, he was quite scary. You have to give lots of props to Coleman Domingo. I mean, I would say if there's any kind of award possibility, I think it would be Coleman Domingo for, like, maybe a supporting role type of nomination, because he was, like, he really kind of nailed Joe Jackson. Now, I will admit, I feel like if there's one small flaw with this, it actually has to deal with, the execution of Joe Jackson and who he is as a character, and that is that it was very one-dimensional. There isn't really a whole lot of depth with this character. There isn't anything too complicated about him and his life. Like, it's just a straight up, like, he's a straight up menace to Michael Jackson, because again, it is kind of well known that Joe was not the greatest father. He even had his kids call him Joseph, never by dad. I mean, all he cared about was fame, fortune, money, and because of that, he and Michael were never really close. And because of that, there's also key things that influence Michael's decision, whether it be in terms of physicality, things that he did. Like, for instance, they mentioned a lot about his nose, so he had a lot of nose jobs, and so you can see how that plays. Again, that becomes a big part of it. But even with that's flaw that we have right there, again, Coleman Domingo does a great job of portraying Joe Jackson. Again, I think that's maybe one of the areas where I would probably say we'll see a lot of potential award possibility. Again, it could be a long shot, but I think he has maybe the best shot at any kind of award, potential. Nia Long as Catherine Jackson, lots of props to her as well. I mean, she absolutely does a great job of embodying her, like, even her body language and her and how she executes like some of the key things about Catherine. She gets that done very well. Like you see how she's playing a very empathetic, very, you know, sorry mother who wishes better for her son, and yet being the champion of trying to help her son kind of get away from that control of her husband. Again, lots of great performances right there. Of course, I think if there's a big highlight about this movie is that they really deliver on highlighting the best of the best of Michael Jackson music, whether it be from the Jackson 5 or from his solo life. I mean, wow. I don't think there was like a moment where I felt ever bored, like when we had the Beat It, the Thriller. I'm telling you, when I was listening, when they were doing the Thriller, I think everybody in that whole auditorium was grooving and moving in some ways. Because I'm gonna tell you, like when I was, you know, listening to it, I was like, you know, moving my toes, like do. Yeah, it's like that's how you were feeling in the moment. Like you're really invested in the fact that, you know, you love these music, you know this music, and now you're, you know, beating to the music. And so that, again, those are some of the more key, like, enjoyable factors of this movie. Now, again, as I said, this movie is not perfect. I mean, honestly, I think I've seen better biopics. I mean, at least biopics that does a much better job in terms of showing the depths of a story, whether it be the character itself or the overall story. And this is kind of where we see a lot of the key issues. So again, as I mentioned earlier before, the characters are very one-dimensional. So Joe, sort of villain, Michael, the whole, you know, protagonist, hero of his story. And even beyond that, I would say that there wasn't really a whole lot of focus on any other characters. I think what really was surprising, that even though the fact that, you know, a key moment of Michael Jackson's life was the Jackson 5, right? I mean, that kind of helped him get, you know, noticed. There was really a lack of involvement with his brothers and his sister, and I'm gonna say sisters actually, because we'll talk a little bit more on that. But the brothers don't really have a whole lot to say in this movie. They kind of are just, you know, background characters. Like, they don't even really say a whole lot. I think they maybe say 3 words at best for each brother, but they really had anything to do in the movie. There wasn't anything that would suggest like what they think, what they feel, if there's any kind of, you know, animosity, whatever. There was really a lack of depth with those characters. They were just there as background characters. Same with the fact that there was LaToya. So LaToya was there. I'm sure maybe they'll play a little bit onto this maybe in the second movie, but LaToya, I mean, there was maybe like one small scene with him and with her and Michael, and that was kind of really it. There wasn't really a whole lot of substance with that. And what's even more baffling is that, you know, when you're watching this movie, you're thinking there's only one sister. In reality, there was 3 sisters that Michael has, and we only saw one. Now, and one of them, of course, that we did not see was Janet Jackson. I'm not gonna lie, like, watching this movie and seeing no Janet Jackson was like the most incredibly like weird, awkward thing, because, you know, Janet was as big of a superstar as, well, I won't say as big, but if there was anybody who was close to Michael's popularity, it was probably Janet, because she had her own album, she, you know, became a big star, and so on. And so it was a little bit odd that she was in the movie, although there was a good reason for that. I mean, she herself didn't want to have her kind of person in the film, so that's understandable. But even then, it felt so odd, the fact that they completely ignored that there wasn't just one but 2 sisters that Michael has. So there's that. I mean, I'm sure probably it might be a little bit odd that they're probably not going to do the whole Scream thing, so that sucks, but whatever. But yeah, that was kind of a little bit of an odd thing. I'm just kind of like, I know Janet Jackson did not want to be in this movie, but also it just feels so odd. But yeah, that was one of the things. But I mean, I gotta say, I think the big issue with this film is that it lacks the depth. It doesn't have that pure substance for a film that you see with most biopics. Now, of course, like, you know, there have been other biopics that have dealt with similar issues. Like, I know with Bohemian Rhapsody, there was like, you know, things were going really quick. Elvis actually does a really good job of really showcasing most of his life. But here it's like, you can tell, like, you know, a lot of these characters are one-dimensional, don't really have a whole lot to add to the story. So there is that. But then again, you know, this is a movie that really showcases the conflict between him and his dad. So there's that. If there's any other thing that I would nitpick, like, I wouldn't actually say nitpick, but I would probably kind of be like, this was a little bit weird, was maybe the prosthetics. I know that there were moments in the movie where Some of the prosthetics seemed a little bit odd. Now, that's not to say that, Javar Jackson looks totally off. I mean, there were moments in the movie, especially the early parts, where he actually nailed, like, he looked like his uncle. And I would say those were spot on. But then when you get to, like, him, like, Michael, like, who's, like, a lot older, getting closer to bad, that's where I was like, okay, some of the prosthetics look a little bit off. Like, especially when you look at Thriller, like, when he's in his, monster form, it's like absolutely accurate to the version that we saw with, the actual like Thriller. That was spot on. But when you see the human version, not gonna lie, I was a little bit like, oh, this does not look right. But I might be the minority on this because I think everyone else hasn't had any issues with that. So whatever. But yeah, the prosthetics were a little bit off here and there. Again, not the whole film, but like, just a couple of details that were a little bit off. So that's just my, observation. But that being the case, as I said, I mean, those were just a few flaws that thankfully don't overcome, just the overall enjoyment factor of this movie. As I said, like, watching this movie, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie, like, even watching some of the early stuff with him in Jackson 5, like the kid who played the younger Michael Jackson, wow, absolutely great. Like, I don't even know what to tell you. Like, his performance, just seeing that innocence from that child, I was like, wow, like, he is really nailing this. Now, as I said, this movie ends with ends with in a good note, like with the 1988 tour that he had her, and he performs bad. And I'm not gonna lie, like, I mean, I was kind of having like moments where it was just as close to my experience that I felt with the Live Nation with the Bohemian Rhapsody, where you see Rami Malek like performing to like all the classic Queen songs. I was having just about the closest experience that I had with watching Bad. I'm like, holy cow, like, this is absolutely stunning. But of course, like, there are the whole questions of, okay, but Michael Jackson's life wasn't all that easy. I mean, especially during the 90s and 2000s with the whole allegations, the controversies, and again, if you guys are not aware, I think they had to cut the third act of the movie that would have covered parts of the 1993 allegations. But then right as they had just finished the filming, the E State had just realized that, oh, by the way, they overlooked like this one key part of the agreement, which is that they're not supposed to dramatize anything about the 1993 allegations. And because of that, they had to go back to the drawing board, rework the movie, and make sure that they removed all those parts because they are not supposed to do that legally. So again, that's a fault on the East State, or I believe the legal team of the East State, something like that. So that's probably why the film wasn't as strong as it could have been, because it lacked the depth. It didn't have that complexity. It didn't really cover some of the more controversial aspects of his life, which I'm sure is probably going to become the focus of the next movie. Because if you're not sure, there's also going to be multiple movies. I think it's going to be 2 parts. This was something that was reported last year. This is going to be a 2-part movie because of the fact that it's such a long film and there's so much to cover with Michael Jackson's life, that I think it's actually a good decision that they do break it into 2 movies, because that way they have a little bit more time to cover certain things of his life. And so because of that, they had to stop in 1988, and they also had to cut the third act because of that. But yeah, I'm sure that if you're not aware, the movie does end with the whole ending credits that says the story continues. So it's pretty implied that there's going to be another movie, and because of the fact the movie's making a lot of money, I'm sure that's gonna happen for sure. But yeah, I'm not going to go too much in depth about the controversies, other than the fact that I'm sure that's going to be covered a lot in the second film. That becomes a key part of it. A lot of it's a downfall, in a sense, the downfall of Michael Jackson. But this movie purely focuses on the rise of Michael Jackson, the best parts about his life, how he is trying to break away from his dad's control and become, have that full creative freedom to make the music that he wants to make. And I think with that, this film becomes a celebration of Michael Jackson's, the peak of his life. And for me, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like, I'm gonna tell you, like, as I was watching the movie, my dad and I, we were like kind of conversing a little bit here and there, like, and he was like saying, oh, and you can tell my dad was really invested in this movie. Like, he was like, oh, that's Don King, oh, they're probably gonna show the Pepsi commercial incident. And he was right, the Pepsi commercial incident was actually shown in the movie. But yeah, you can really see how much of Michael has such a huge influence. You can see how much he became such a big star during the 70s and 80s, when he was really really starting to get, his groove on. And not only that, but again, if you're a huge fan of Michael Jackson, his music, like, you can really bop to the movie. And I think overall I had a really great, enjoyable experience. I think the only thing I had a key issue with was the fact that, and it had nothing to do with the movie, but there was somebody in my theater, and she was like right next to my dad, and she could not stop being on her phone. I mean, this is coming from the fact that, this theater's packed, most people are there to really watch this movie, and this one person could not stop being on his phone every 2-3 minutes. It was so frustrating. I was like, I wanted to say something, but I didn't. But I would say that was like the only thing that kind of hurt my viewing experience, and it had nothing to do with the film. And it's just the fact that somebody just could not drop their phone for maybe just 2 hours just to watch this movie. And so, yeah, if you're somebody who's gonna go watch Michael, please do not be on your phone. I highly suggest that, because, technically speaking, when you are going to the theater, you should not be on your phone. But yeah, that was like the one side note I had. I was just like, this is so annoying. But yeah, overall, I had a good time watching Michael. It's not the most perfect musical biopic, but if you are a fan of Michael Jackson, and if you are somebody who's there to kind of celebrate his life, this movie is for you. A lot of people really liked it in my theater. I think I actually ended up seeing it the second time because of the, annoyance of my neighbors, and I actually had a much better time watching the second time, and the people around me were like banging, they were singing, and that was a much better experience. But yeah, overall, had a good time watching this movie. Again, it's not perfect, but it's a good film, and I'm very intrigued to see what the second part's gonna be about. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Michael. I want to know your thoughts now the movie is out in theaters. I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of questions, concerns, things that they want to address. But yeah, I want to know your thoughts having seen the movie. What do you think? If you're someone who has already seen it, what do you think about the film? What do you think about the performances? What do you think about, what are the highlights? What are maybe some of the more weaker parts of the film? Are you excited to see the second movie? What do you expect the second movie will focus on? Are you hoping that certain songs will show up? What do you think about the fact that the movie itself stopped in 1988? And if any other thoughts and concerns, let me know your thoughts below. Make sure to like and subscribe.